When we ask people who have seen us explain lean thinking and lean principles, what they took away the most, they often point back to our take on demand and capacity, particularly our model for just explaining how you can balance those two things out. So I'm aimed with a flip chart to provide an explanation. So what's the problem? First, a bit of a story. This is a conundrum that lots of organisations that we work with are facing. I'm sure you are too at the moment. It's when their demand quite substantially often outstrips the capacity that they have to deal with that demand. So if we took a really simple example, say a contact centre, this might present itself as lots of calls coming in and just not having the capacity to deal with it. And it's often real. This could be, we're getting 10,000 calls a week. We simply don't have the capacity to deal with that. We can only deal with 8,000 calls a week. It's real. There's a business case to get more capacity. And that is often the answer that's presented. You know, I'm sure you all heard the adage that we need more people. Makes sense, right? We add more capacity here and we can level those two numbers out. We still get 10,000 calls, but we now got enough people to deal with 10,000 calls. Does that work? Answer is no. And unfortunately, it's really expensive as well. But why doesn't it work? So, one of the main reasons is these guys, new capacity, are new. They can't really deal with the complicated demand that's often coming in. And if they do, it takes them a little bit of time. So you don't actually get the capacity that you thought you were getting in. A slither there, lower than you expected. Also, who's training these new members of staff? Unfortunately, it's often the experienced staff that you have. So you lose a bit of their capacity. On top of that, new staff often tend to get things wrong or take longer to do things. And it's, again, your experienced staff that are dealing with that. Yeah? So you lose more of their capacity. So whereas you thought you were balancing things out, what you're really doing is increasing your capacity, but not quite to the level where it meets the demand. Easy answer, right? Just get more capacity. Wow, it doesn't quite work like that. As I said, often new staff are getting things incorrect. What that does, it actually starts to push up the demand. Yeah? And we see this. So what ends up happening is this gap that existed originally, this gap here, stays the same, or in fact starts to increase. Yeah? That means the demand grows even quicker than you can grow your capacity. And you get in this vicious cycle of growing both rather than tackling the real issue. Yeah? So what's the answer? So our take on things is to split demand into two different types. Yeah? The first, I'm sure many of you have heard of it, is value demand. So this is the stuff that we want to deal with. Yeah? How we deal with it, what channel it comes in, less important. Yeah? But it is the demand we want. People calling to pay things, people calling to report things that we want reporting. What's the other type? Some of you may have heard of it as failure demand. Yeah? And this is in essence the demand we really want to avoid. What is it? Well, it's any demand that's caused by a failure to do something correctly, or it's a failure to do something that should have been done. Yeah, providing information that we should have provided. Yeah, and if we haven't, and someone has to contact us, and then that would class as failure demand. The worst thing about failure demand is all the time you spend dealing with this, resolving this, is a waste of time because it's avoidable. And we shouldn't have got things incorrect in the first place. The fact that we're having to deal with it is a waste of our time. Yeah? So what do? Well, we start to look at it. We start to understand it. Why is it happening? Look for the root cause. In essence, what we're trying to do is eliminate it bit by bit. Eliminate as much of the failure demand as you can get. I hear you asking how much failure demand are we used to? It's not good hearing. Most organisations we work with, that failure demand is somewhere between 55 and 65%. Yeah? The highest I've seen it was up in 86%, which is huge. That's 65% of all the demand you face, whether it's a team, organisation or function, is likely to be caused by some sort of failure. Yeah? So the more of that we can get rid of, the better. The net result, what we're really after, is that we can start to see the demand levels start to drop. So in the contact center, instead of 10,000 calls, we can start seeing this go down to 8,000, 6,000. It's the alternative way of balancing out with the capacity that we've got. Okay. Fortunately, it's not easy because, you know, where we face the demand isn't often where the problems are. They tend to be further down the line. So we do have to do some process improvement. Okay, that's sort of step one. What's the other thing we can do? Well, we can certainly look at the capacity side. And I know lots of people are already doing this. People are looking at automating processes, process improvement. Now, all for that, of course, we're all for process improvement. We're all for automation as well. You know, changing to digital channels that are much more efficient. Great. The key thing I would say is only do that for value demand. Don't waste your time trying to automate failure demand. Concentrate that effort on actually getting rid of the demand, eliminating the demand. Yeah, you don't want to just spend lots and lots of time, money, resource into automating this stuff because in essence, it's the stuff that is proof of poor experience for customers. Right, so what are we doing on the capacity side? Now, unfortunately, me included, no one spends 100% of their time adding value all the time. Yeah, we do lots of other bits and pieces that we have to do often. And we like to split it into 3 different types. So the first is value add. Yeah, so this is the time that we spend adding that value to those customers, doing the things the customers want us to do. It's, you know, providing the resolution that they need for their value query. Remember, everything that's failure demand, you know, even if we're sorting it out for them, the fact that it was failure makes it something else. The bottom one over here, what we often refer to as non-value add, or more brutally, waste. Things like duplication, duplicated effort. It could be things like putting things, fixing things that have gone wrong. Anything like that, travel, all forms of waste. In fact, we already spend hundreds of thousands, even millions of pounds trying to eliminate this waste already. Yeah? And then the third one is what we refer to as business essential, non-value add. Important, it's business essential, so you need to do it for regulatory reasons or legal reasons, but it doesn't actually add value to the customer. And a good way of looking at non-value add and waste is if you were doing that 90% of the time and this 10% of the time, would your customers be happy? Answer is no. Yeah. One of the interesting ones in Benva is stuff like training. Now, if you trained for 4 days a week and on the 5th day you were really good, would your customers be happy with that? The answer is no. They understand that you need to train, so you might say, oh, we spend a day a week doing the training, but they want certainly you spending most of your time doing value add. So what's the usual percentage split that we see here? It's drawn like that for a reason. It's usually about 30% on each of these. Yeah? So we're spending about 30% of our time on each of these 3. Some departments, some organizations, the waste side is much higher. So what are we trying to do? Much like this side, what we're going to try and do is figure out what the waste activity is, and we're going to try and remove as much of that as possible. And this is where process improvement comes in. It's removing those waste steps, streamlining processes, introducing error proofing so that you don't make errors, which obviously mean duplicated effort. And it could be automation as well, sits perfectly here. We're really eliminating anything that would be classed as waste at a process level, or at individual steps of a process as well. We want to do the same thing with Benva. We want to try and get rid of as much of it as possible, or certainly reduce the amount of time that it takes us to deal with that Benva. And again, what's the net result? Well, your capacity doesn't reduce. Your capacity stays exactly where it is. All we're doing is we're increasing the amount of time that you're spending on value add. Yeah? And what we tend to find is you can increase that by about another 30%. Yeah? So you're removing about 20% of one and 5% of the other, so you're increasing. And what in real terms, that actually means that you're spending twice as much time as you were before on value-adding activity, which is huge. It's like having another one of these bars added on top. But what we've achieved here therefore, is a reduction in demand and more of our time adding value, delivering work, doing work, the work that our customers really want from us. Better experience. A much more sustainable way of balancing out demand and capacity.